click and we'll be good to go there, Mr. Lewis.
Yep. A date yet?
We're ready, Mr.
Good.
Chair. Everything's ready to go whenever you are.
Good afternoon. It is Monday, January 8th, 2018. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Transportation Commission. I'll call roll. Tracy Hopkins, under the weather. Ryan Lancaster was excused. Stephen Lewis.
Here.
David Ballard is here. Brent Sawcheck.
Here.
Let's see, Brian Leslie's no longer here, right? No,
Just absent.
he is absent, excuse me. Ryan Hall.
Here.
David McKinney.
Here.
Britton Davis.
Here.
Erica Bowen.
Here.
Luke Kavanaugh, absent. Sean Martin.
Here.
Tony Tisdale.
Here.
Ronald Gilbert.
Here.
Miranda Carson.
Here.
Okay. Second item of business is the adoption of the agenda. Any discussion, additions, deletions, comments? Is there a motion to adopt?
So moved.
Have a motion by Mr. Lewis, a second.
I'll second it.
Mr. Konsacek. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Item 3 is the approval of the minutes from the December 4, 2017 meeting. Looked good to me, but did anyone find where we need to tweak it, or?
I'll make a motion to accept.
Mr. Hall has made a motion to approve the minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
Well, we have a tie with Mr. Konsacek again and Mr. Lewis.
was-
Oh, Mr. Davis. Okay, all right. Excuse me. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Mr. Hood, I'm signing those minutes. Okay. Fourth item of business, let's welcome the newest commissioner, David McKinney. Mr. McKinney, as has been our practice, we'll give you a couple minutes in the sun to have you tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, just to be brief, I am an attorney. I've been practicing law as a registered patent attorney for about 20 years, and I currently run my own firm. Before going to law school, I was a civil engineer and worked for Keller Associates Engineers. At the time, they had their office in Boise, and studied civil engineering in college. So I've been involved with both engineering and technology and highway and transportation issues for a long time, or at least been familiar with them. Mostly what I did as an engineer was highway design, traffic engineering, that sort of thing. From 2007 to 2012, I served as a planning commissioner on the Planning and Zoning Commission for the city of West Jordan, Utah. And that was until 2012 when we moved back to Meridian. So I'm happy to work with this commission.
Very good, Mr. McKinney. Any of the other commissioners have questions for Mr. McKinney? I had the opportunity to participate in the interview, and I believe that Mr. McKinney will bring experience, both practical as from his previous experience, and should be a good addition to our commission. So welcome aboard, Mr. McKinney.
Thank you.
Item 5, old business items, update from Mr. Hood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. I'm going to be pretty brief this month. We have a pretty full agenda, but I do want to highlight a couple of things that you'll find beginning on page 7 in your agenda packet that went out for this month. The first item that I want to highlight, and again, just to reiterate, new information is bold in the memo, so I'm not going to touch on everything, but if you want to thumb through it, the information that is darker is newer information. Again, the first one on page 7 I want to talk about is Pine Avenue, Meridian to Locust Grove. So Knife River won that contract with ACHD. The contract amount is $5.5 million. Notice proceed is scheduled for January 15th. They're already doing work out there, but for the next probably through August, September, will be a construction zone there on Pine from Meridian Road back towards Locust Grove. So try to avoid it if you can. The roadway, it'll remain open for the most part, but they do have some lane closures and whatnot they'll have to do when they do some of the bridge work and whatnot. But that project is going forward here right away. So I want to just highlight that for you all. Then just kind of moving to the end of page 7 and then throughout page 8 and 9, you'll see a lot of this same information just on the status of projects as we talk about priorities for this next year. So if you need to refer back to them as far as, oh, what is that project again? Most of the projects that are in ACHD's integrated 5-year work plan as far as roadways and intersections are there on page 8 and into 9. So if you're just curious again about the kind of the scope and the timing of those projects as we talk about prioritization, you might just want to dog ear that page or otherwise recall it if you need to kind of see what the project actually again entails. 3/4 of the way down on page 9, US 2026, just wanted to make you aware that I attended a kickoff meeting at ITD District 3 on December 5th for the Locust Grove to Eagle segment of US 2026. Parametrics is doing that design for ITD. Representatives from Eagle and Boise were also present and kind of walk through some elements that we want to have a unified look on, just to refresh everybody's memory. ITD is going to widen on the south side, so basically the north side of that corridor won't be touched until they come back through and widen it to 6 lanes eventually, but starting on the south and widening and adding sound walls and pathways and lighting, all the other things there, but on the south side. So again, just wanted to let you know that project is moving forward, at least moving through design since the environmental clearance was granted earlier late last year. Also, Interstate 84 and the next one on page 10, State Highway 16, ITD board did approve money for design of State Highway 16, so about $6 million. I'm just going to read to you a little bit from that project description. So state funding source, preliminary engineering on State Highway 16 between I-84 and US 2026. Funds will be used to update traffic projections, validate right-of-way needs, account for recent development activity, develop a phasing plan for future construction, and update right-of-way and construction costs. So that's in this year as well, 2018, for preliminary engineering. Again, $6 million that the ITD board approved in December for that project.
Excuse me, Caleb. A clarification on that, the Compass Board will also have to approve those changes both through an amendment to the Communities in Motion 2040 plan as well as the TIP, and that goes out for public comment tomorrow. So you should be seeing some information come out on that. That's why.
Thank you. Just a little bit further down on page 10 in the memo, and we'll talk about this again as we get into priorities. A couple of the commissioners made comment on this project, Railwood Trail. We did have to delay that project this last month with Compass. It was moving forward, and then some right-of-way issues came up, and trying to work on acquiring some easements necessary. This is about a half-mile west of where we're at currently along the rail corridor. There are a couple of property owners that we need. Most of the pathway is going to go in the irrigation easement, but there are a couple of private property easements that we're trying to acquire or otherwise acquire the right-of-way or property outright for that project. And so just with some of the balancing without getting to all of the different variations of what Tony had to go through to to make that work, the project had to move back into preliminary development. So hopefully it can pick back up, and I think we can get over that hurdle, but it did cause a delay in the programming of that project. Just something else that isn't in your memo that I made a note of. Tomorrow, the Meridian Business, Downtown Business Association President Nick Grove will be addressing the city council, asking them to remove the planters and decking that's out on Idaho Avenue between Main and 2nd Street. For various reasons, those property owners, those business owners on that block would like to revert back to the way things were with the parking. It just hasn't been as useful and as successful as maybe we were hoping for a couple of years ago when those improvements went down. So again, Mr. Grove is going to be here tomorrow afternoon asking the council to probably ask the Parks Department to go ahead and pull those things up. I don't know what's going to happen with that stuff in the short term. I think that'll probably be just stored out at Parks Lanark facility, but I've asked the MDBA to think about what else, how they could be repurposed, maybe used somewhere else downtown. Maybe just a quick, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair, just a quick background and history on that project. It was meant as sort of the guinea pig for downtown to see what else could be done on some of these right-of-ways that are fairly wide. I believe there's about 80 feet of right-of-way there and 52 or 57 feet of pavement between the curbs. And so the idea was to make some public spaces that could attract or even retain people as they come to downtown on that block in particular, and activate it, if you will. But again, it didn't really take off, and it's been through 2 summer seasons now, and some of the leaves are gathering under the decking and things like that, and again, just hasn't been used. So, but maybe it could be used somewhere else as a demonstration type of project in the downtown. But as of right now, that's kind of where that group is at. So with that, Mr. Chair, I think those are the things I wanted to highlight. And again, the one new thing that wasn't in your memo about Idaho Avenue. But with that, I would stand for any questions, comments, or anything else you want to talk about.
Any questions for Mr. Hood?
Mr. Chairman?
We've got, you were drawing first.
All right. Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to give you some information on an additional ITD project. It's the State Highway 69 project from Kuna to Meridian.
Okay.
This is a resurfacing project. We've finished up design. It is moving towards bid and then construction. This project is a part of something I talked to you a couple months prior about restriping near the intersection of Overland and State Highway 69. RBCI has been hired as the public involvement consultant, and so they are working on a fact sheet. Should have that finalized this week or next, and then plan to go out and meet with some businesses that will be affected near that intersection. And so what we'll be doing at the intersection is there'll be a median barrier from the intersection of Overland and State Highway 69 all the way through Davenport. So there will be some restricted turning movements. Her intent is to go door to door to some of these businesses. Once the fact sheet is complete, I'll forward it to Caleb. They were looking for maybe someone on this team to go out and speak as well. Potentially also Stacy having some law enforcement there too, just to talk. This is what she said, so I'm just passing it along.
You have volunteered.
Construction is anticipated to start sometime between July 4th and August 8th. And I do not know what end of the corridor do they plan on starting with, whether it's at the intersection of Overland or if they're going to start down by Kuna. It's an entire resurfacing project as well as adding signals at Lake Hazel and Hubbard.
Very good. Thanks, Ms. Bowen. Anything else or questions for Ms. Bowen? Mr. Lewis?
Just a couple quick questions. On the parklets, Mr. Hood, was there a consensus among the business owners, or was it kind of hit and miss? What was the feedback?
Mr. Lewis, Commissioner Ballard, everyone that responded, and I don't know how many comment sheets were actually returned to the MDBA. Nick has that information. But it's my understanding that everybody that provided both written and verbal comment was in favor of removing those, both on the north and south side of the block, even though the south side of the block only has the planters and the bike rack. But everybody, there were a couple, I heard, as far as verbal comments go, I did hear one or two that were a little less vocal about removing them, meaning they could be okay with them staying, but nobody was really in favor of them, if you would. So some were pretty adamantly opposed. A couple were, hey, let's give it a little bit more time, maybe. But no one really said, yeah, let's continue to try this experiment.
And then another question, on the rail with trail, what is the current project that is programmed with, and is it with Compass and ITD, right? 'Cause it's not ACHD funds, correct?
TAP funds.
Okay, TAP funds. What are the limits of that project?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Lewis, the scope of the project goes from Meridian Road right here back in along Broadway to the railroad tracks, basically, and along the irrigation canal. I mean, just literally right where we are, just due west. To about a half mile, it comes out at 7th or 8th Street,
Okay,
and then connects in with the neighborhood there. So it's approximately a half mile of the pathway project that would then connect into the neighborhoods at the sidewalks.
okay. Thank you.
You bet. Any other comments before I close item 5? Hearing none. Sergeant Arnold, Meridian Police Department Status Report, item 6A. Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Caleb, can I get to Google Earth from here?
Yeah, you should be able to.
Is there a,
Go to Google Chrome there.
where at?
However you want to do it, the icon or the...
I'm not seeing it.
I'm going to try real quick.
Okay. Oh, there it is, okay. Can I sign into that?
You don't need to sign in.
Just get
X
next.
that stuff out. And you can...
It's my first time with a computer. All right, help me out here.
You want just
Yeah,
Google
just-
Earth or
yeah,
what?
just Google Earth.
Get you to Meridian even, hopefully. Imagine that's what you want to talk
10
about.
Mile McMillan would be better.
I can see you, Lewis.
So the only thing that I have this month is the, just to the west of that intersection of 10 Mile McMillan, there's a raised divider that goes westbound from 10 Mile, which effectively cuts off the south exit of Walmart from the main parking lot for traffic that wants to go back eastbound. Will prevent turning traffic from coming that's westbound into there. And we'll go to 10 Mile McMillan in Paris.
We're close.
And I'm sure they have a Walmart there too.
Oh, there it is. Thank you.
Anyhow, what we're getting complaints on, what we've seen out there is a lot of traffic that's continuing westbound or eastbound in the westbound lanes to make that turn in, since it's only 100 feet or so. Or people are making right turns out of there and then making U-turns back around the divider, which I don't think is really what the intention of that divider was for.
Get north here.
And of course, the Walmart's not done yet, so it doesn't really show you what we're, because the divider's not there now. So the divider comes down west of here, and then it stops right in this area here. The picture the satellite picture that I had before, you can actually see where they've worn the paint down in the turn lane, making the U-turns around. What I was looking for is either something that would prevent them from driving down the wrong side of the road to get to Walmart, or in looking at it, is there really a need for that divider there? I could see it if they change that to a 5-lane road, or traffic was higher than what it is in that area right now, but it seems like it doesn't really need to be there.
You're saying they're coming out of the Walmart parking lot to the west and then making a U-turn going back to the
They
east?
come out, this is the south exit here,
Okay.
and they make a right, and they go down about 100 feet, and then they make a U-turn and go back eastbound. In looking at this, I've sat, over here's where the employee parking is, I just pull in there and kind of watch what's going on. A lot of cars are doing that. The westbound traffic is pretty light, even during the 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. There's still plenty of breaks in traffic where people could make the left to get out of there, going across that one lane and the turn lane without a lot of problems.
Have there been any accidents as a result of that particular movement?
We don't have any accidents. I haven't seen any accidents as a result of people driving on the wrong side of the road. What I have seen is people stop in the turn lane and wait for traffic to clear, and then they jump onto to that westbound lane and shoot down that 100 feet or so, and then make their turn in. So it's kind of funny when you talk with them about it when you stop them. And, oh, I couldn't do that. Really? Okay. Yeah, it's pretty entertaining. So yeah, this picture here you can actually see. I've lost my mouse.
It's on, I've got it on another.
Oh, okay. Here at the end of the divider where they're making the turn, and it's a pretty common thing.
Your recommendation is either take it out completely based on the traffic flows currently, or extend it to prevent a lot of this from happening.
Yep, exactly. Either one of those would be perfectly good. If there's a reason for it to be there, then let's make it long enough that if you're gonna drive on the wrong side of the road, you're gonna have to drive the length of that section. Or let's just take it out and let people make that left turn out and left turn in.
And the road to the east, so it intersects with,
Vincenza or something like this bigger intersection down here?
no, to the right. So if I'm going 10 Mile and
okay.
McMillan, okay?
Yes, sir.
So what's the distance to 10 Mile then?
I don't know the actual distance, but
If you take
probably
out,
500 feet or so.
if you take out that barrier, is that going to interfere with cars wanting to make a left onto 10 Mile?
No, I don't think it's going to, because they have the turn lanes further down.
Okay? I just didn't know how far it stacked up there some days.
In sitting there and watching the traffic, it really doesn't get stacked up in any of the intersections there at 10
Okay.
Mile. Till about 5 o'clock, and then you get quite a bit of northbound traffic that backs up, but it's not unmanageable by any means.
Okay, okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Lewis?
just a comment, the access to the Walmart is too close to 10 Mile to allow full access, so I think if we're gonna make a recommendation, I would recommend it be extended to the full intersection there to the west and not shortened.
I think that has some merit.
Could you zoom out just a little bit more, please, Cale? So I can see what's up north there. Where's that entrance to there's one in the north here, but what about just north on 10 Mile there? There's another one, isn't there? Oh. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
They have plenty of opportunity. It's just drivers trying to, they're just going what's simplest there right now. But I think there's plenty of options for them to make those different movements, either if they want to go east on McMillan or south on 10 Mile. So I would agree with Commissioner Lewis and say I would think to extend it more than to take it out completely.
President Ballard, if I may.
Yes?
All right. Just give you a little background on the median. The reason why that it was restricted to right in, right out is because it doesn't meet our policy for a full driveway. if Caleb measured it, I'm guessing it's probably about 330 feet from the intersection, which is what our policy is for right in, right out, and the 660 for a full access. So that's why it was restricted when, at the time of Walmart was being built. So it's what, about 500, so 660 is what our minimum from a signalized intersection for a full movement.
Okay. Sergeant, are you looking for our comments? Mr. Lewis kind of volunteered, but does that help, or?
Yeah, either way, you know, if we can't remove it, then let's lengthen it so that it's
More effective.
Maybe it will discourage people 100 or 150 feet to drive on the wrong side of the road is not a big deal, where maybe, you know, 400 or 500 feet is. But I think we make it a little bit more difficult for them. And, you know, if we make them go down to make the U-turn to the main intersection, maybe they'll see that there's a way they can actually go out next time they go to Walmart. They can make that left out of there.
Okay. Mr. Martin, would there be, policies or procedure from the highway district for that to be extended?
This is something I could just take back as staff, and we could have it put into a miscellaneous concrete type contract. It wouldn't take much to do, because we're not restricting anybody else by doing so. We're just extending it, so
Okay.
I don't see a problem with it.
Okay. So, Mr. Lewis, I don't know how formal you'd like to make the suggestion to Sergeant Arnold or to ACHD?
Well, I can make a motion if that's what you're fishing for.
Well, is that a recommendation?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. I move that we recommend that the median be extended from the Walmart driveway westward, either extend the existing curb or perhaps even turn it into a full raised median, depending on what the resources are, so that turning movements are restricted to the 10-mile intersection and the, I'm not sure what this intersection to the west is.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Hall, so we have a motion by Mr. Lewis and a second by Mr. Hall. I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay.
All right.
So
Thanks, everybody.
we send you with our recommendation.
Next time I'll figure out
Please.
how to use the Google Earth. I promise.
Thank you, Sergeant. Okay, item 6A. 6B. Southeast Meridian Crosswalk.
Chairman, can I go backwards on you real quick?
Sure.
Last week, we talked about Franklin Road and the speed limit study. Has that been initiated?
Mr. Chair, I did receive an email from Mr. Martin on Friday. The packet was done. The agenda was already published at that point. However, if time allows today, we will circle back on that. So I don't know if Sergeant Arnold can or wants to stay, but I do have some information. I believe he was copied on the email. So he's seen the report that Josh Sack from ACHD kind of put together, but we don't have time right now. But under communications, if we get there today, if not, next month.
Okay.
But yes, it's been done.
Okay.
Okay. So we move to item 6B.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So on page 11 of your packet today, you have my summary of a letter that's attached on the following pages, so 12 and 13. I want to show you just a couple of things. Let me get back. So the letter, if you read it, requests some crosswalks in anticipation of the new YMCA. This family lives in Tuscany and would like to be able to walk, bike, rollerblade, whatever, to get from Tuscany basically to the new YMCA. So the request is for crosswalks, but I want to kind of show you first that the crosswalks won't do any good really without any sidewalks, and there's some gaps in the sidewalk infrastructure that we probably need to talk about first, or at least concurrently with this. So I want to show you this exhibit, I think. Let me show another one. So Albertsons is going in on the northwest corner of Amity and Eagle. So this is their site plan, and it also shows the widening the existing single lane roundabout to a dual lane roundabout. That work is scheduled for right now. The coming months, this intersection will be upgraded and widened. I have another exhibit that I want to show you here. So this shows that same exhibit over the top of an aerial, and I'm not exactly sure, didn't figure out exactly where this family that wrote the letter, the petition, lives, but they did have a crosswalk shown basically right here at Montague, potentially a crossing Eagle Road up here further. Just for reference, the YMCA is over here off of what's shown as Howery on this this map. It will carry a different name. I can't remember the name of. Stockenham is what it will be called, basically in the same general direction. So here's Hillsdale School, the YMCA, and a park. So the purple represents what will be on the ground either today, so there's sidewalks on all the streets in the subdivisions, or what Albertsons is going to be putting in with their roundabout project. The black represents gaps in that. So you can see, even if you had a crosswalk, say, here at Montague, there isn't any sidewalk until you get to here, and you're walking in a shoulder, which isn't the best idea, even if you went down to Taconic to get into the school that way. ACHD hasn't, I don't believe, as of last week anyways, hasn't stood the polls, but they are putting in a hawk signal here at Taconic and Eagle Road, but that's mainly to get the folks that are in Black Rock subdivision and, shoot, I can't think of the name of the other subdivision here, but basically over to Hillsdale Elementary School and the new park as well. But that's basically an east-west crossing here at Eagle Road. So again, if you're in Tuscany, that doesn't do you much good because there's really on both sides of the street lacking sidewalk infrastructure. Brighton also does have a commercial project here and a St. Alphonsus. So there will eventually be some sidewalk on this portion, but this is still owned by the Hill family, hasn't been annexed, is not part of the city, don't know when it may be. So again, you're left with a gap here. This is also owned by the school district. This 40, if you're looking at your monitors, is owned by the school district, but again, they don't really have it planned for any imminent schools at this time, so that sidewalk that lacks on the north side may continue. So again, Albertsons is going to be doing the roundabout. Don't know of any other planned improvements, Amity east of Eagle. But again, as you consider this request, I think it makes some sense, but crosswalks doesn't, again, in my opinion, you need the sidewalks. And so again, as my last request or mention in the memo part of this agenda item was to think about this as we go into the requesting ACHD to add to their community programs projects, some projects in Meridian. I will also just point out real quick, ACHD also does have a plan to widen Eagle Road and include any sidewalk that doesn't get put in with the Albertsons project in the year 2020. And again, if you wanted to double check that year, you could go back to page 8 or 9 in your packet and look at that Eagle Road project. But again, they'll be widening Eagle Road between Victory and Amity in the near future. So that's the request. I don't see anyone representing the family here in the audience. I did communicate with them, letting them know that I was going to present this to you all today, that they were welcome to attend. I also mentioned that it would be on YouTube and that they could watch it either live or in the library after the fact. But essentially, that is the request from the Huff family, and stand for any questions or comments, or again, if we want to even open up our priority projects list for community programs and talk about that now, I'm open to your discretion, Mr. Chair. So I'm just presenting the letter that was submitted to the city.
Any questions from the commission? Mr. Hall?
I just have one, yeah. With that Albertsons project, I see some black lines bordering their development. Is that standard not to have them complete sidewalks in planning and zoning through the entire phase of that, or is that something that comes about when ACHD widens the road? I guess that's my initial question.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Hall, it's a good question, and I did not do the research before this meeting. I could probably look it up if you guys want to have another conversation and allow me time to get on our searchable documents and figure it out. Typically, city staff will ask the mayor and city council with the first phase of development to tie into existing sidewalks, so don't leave these gaps. But sometimes the developer doesn't want to do that and has a phasing plan. So again, I did not verify prior to this meeting if in fact on one or the other with the Albertsons permit, if they're required to do their whole perimeter sidewalks or not, but it's something as staff, we're trained to get it with phase one. But again, sometimes that doesn't always reflect reality. So, well, Mr. Chair, if you allow me a minute, I can look it up. You guys can talk about other things, but I'll look it up and in fact see if.
I mean, I was just curious. I not necessarily have to look it up.
I just forgot to look it up.
It seemed logical to tie in to existing sidewalks there with Tuscany all the way through. I mean, it's a short gap to not have planning and zoning see that when they were approving this permit or the build out of that. So that's my 2 cents worth anyway. And then in terms of crosswalks and stuff, I think you kind of alluded to it, but until this all gets developed and built out, unless we try to push something up in the community projects, I think we probably need to wait or see how the development goes in that area, but that's my opinion.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Lewis?
Just a question that relates to this. Amity and Eagle are both arterial streets, so wouldn't the impact fees that the developer pays to ACHD cover the improvements adjacent to the property, or does the developer have to pay for adjacent improvements as well as pay the impact fee? I'm not quite sure how that works.
So, Mr. or Chairman, Commissioners, ACHD does collect an impact fee, but it's a county-wide district. So all of the fees paid into the impact fee system get put into one big pot.
Right.
The developer is responsible for improving their frontage on arterials only with the sidewalk, dedicating the right-of-way and putting in the sidewalk. Lane widening, now occasionally there'll be ancillary lanes, turn lanes, decel lanes, those types of things that can also be required, but no real widening, if you will, of the roadway, because that'll be done with impact fees when ACHD does a capital project.
Thank you for that clarification.
I had a question. So if I understand the request, they would ask for a crosswalk across Amity and across Eagle Road, which will be extremely busy streets. How do you protect those crosswalks? And what we have reviewed recently is a crosswalk just the other side of this building going across Meridian Road, and how that is protected. And I struggle with that because you talk about bike lanes and pedestrian lanes and traffic. How do you make those compatible? It seemed that crosswalk would inhibit traffic at a major intersection looking down the road. But that's what planning and zoning is about, I guess.
So, Mr. Chair, yes, the letter does request crosswalks, but just and I'm looking at Sean, and I know there are other traffic engineers in the room, but I know that ACHD wouldn't simply just put paint down in a situation like this on an arterial with the speed limits being what they are. It would probably be some type of there'd be some lights out there involved with any crossing that goes out there to offer some other form of protection. But again, we're a little probably premature talking about what form of treatment of this, crosswalk. I think they use the crosswalk as a general term of some dedicated place to cross the road, not necessarily getting into the treatment that would be used to do so. But yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point about this one here and others, and if that's appropriate in these locations or not. I did just want to clarify, there is a map with at least with what their ideas of where crosswalks could go, and that's at Zaldia Lane, which is just off the map here, just barely off the lane on Eagle Road. Eventually, when the school site develops potential crossing there at Amity, or again back at Montague, and they also starred. There's 4 stars on the map, which is page 13 of your packet, of what they had ideas, what they called ideas for the crosswalks there. So that's where they thought a pedestrian crossing may make some sense. But
Mr. Chair and Mr. Hood.
Yes.
Won't the Amity intersection handle the crosswalks? So I think I agree with Mr. Hood. I think initially is just, if we are looking at anything, it should just be for the connectivity of the sidewalk to that intersection, because that intersection is being built this year, and it will provide crossings of that intersection. So the request for a crosswalk, I don't think is applicable, as it would be more of how to get the people from Tuscany over to that other quadrant with sidewalks. So what is ACHD's, would they do something like that, let's say on the southeast quadrant where there's no actual development right now? Would they provide something like that? Would it be applicable or possible?
Yes, commissioners, that would fall in line with what we have, our community programs budget, and something that you guys would submit a request to if you wanted to submit requests for a sidewalk or pathway connection from Amity down to where Century Farms. And that would be an appropriate recommendation towards ACHD.
Anything else in follow-up? So is there any other information to, okay?
Mr. Chair, I wasn't able to find that in time, so maybe I'll listen with one ear to what Lisa has to say, and I'll continue to see if I can find the findings from the Albertsons project, and as we get into community programs, maybe bring that up to address Commissioner Hall's question and concern.
Okay, well, there's a lot of items to be considered with developing. A lot of information. So 6B, item 6C, Compass Freight Corridor Study Update. We've invited Lisa Itkonam to address us.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. My name is Lisa Itkonam. I'm a principal planner with Compass, or Community Planning Association of Southwest Idaho. And I'm here to present to you a brief overview of the Compass Freight study and what we've done with that. And thank you to Chairman Ballard for inviting me. He is also a member of the Compass Freight Advisory Work Group, which has been guiding us throughout this study, as well as providing overall feedback and input into freight issues and the freight planning that we're doing. So I will, you have a brief memo in your packet on page 15, and memo also has a link to the Compass website where you can get more information, including all the working papers to date from this study. So you have a lot more information there. So I will provide a brief overview of the Compass Freight study. I'll talk about the regional freight corridors, and then briefly about what this study gives us for freight planning and really what this means for you. Before I get to talking about freight, I will say a few words about Compass. So Compass, or the Community Planning Association of Southwest Idaho, is a regional planning organization for Ada and Canyon counties. We are a member agency of local governments, so we have members that are cities, highway districts, the 2 counties, and others. And we plan, that's one of the main things that we do. such as we developed the Regional Long-Range Transportation Plan, which is called Communities in Motion. We also facilitate regional collaboration, and part of that is having these work groups that can focus on specific issues and provide us that kind of feedback that we can get experts into those work groups and kind of augment our general membership that way. We help implement projects in the two counties, for instance, through grant applications or providing small implementation grants. And then we provide technical expertise, such as modeling, mapping, data collection and analyses, and then special studies, for instance, studies like this freight study that I'll talk about. So this one got started a year ago, just about a year ago in January. And it will be completed this spring. The purpose is to identify freight activity centers, or what's here called clusters, in the two counties, based on where do we have areas that are generating a lot of freight. I'll talk a little bit more about those. And then looking at which are the currently used freight corridors. Again, I'll talk more about that. Also, the study has profiled regionally important commodities and the supply chains. So what are the kinds of things that are either coming in, going out, or moving within the two counties, and what does that mean for us? And then identifying needs, freight-related needs. So keep in mind that this is a freight study, and it's really looking at transportation from a freight lens. So identifying freight-related needs, and then identifying projects or policies that would address freight-related maintenance to improve safety and manage congestion. So the study started by identifying locations and the nature of the major freight transfer centers and other areas with many freight generating businesses. So they used information from essentially truck GPS data. The American Transportation Research Institute, or ATRI, collects that information nationwide. So we get information on the truck trip ends, so essentially GPS data on it pings when they get here. And then looking at also employment data, so from Idaho Department of Labor and some other sources, to start looking at where do we have businesses that are generating freight, either as in incoming or outgoing, or that have a lot of employment relating to freight. And what you have there on your map are these four main, primary freight clusters. So there's one in Caldwell, the other one Nampa area generally, and then this what's here called the Meridian-Boise Junction corridor, essentially all the way from Meridian into Boise, kind of along that rail route there. And then the fourth one is around the Boise airport. So you have a lot of facilities there for warehousing and shipping, that kinds of things. So those are the primary clusters. And you also in this map see a draft of the freight corridors that are then connecting to those clusters and providing access to the interstate. In looking at what we have, what kinds of things are moving, so the four top commodities by value, the number one by value is electronic components. And most of this is going out, no big surprise there. The second one is warehouse and distribution centers, so a lot of consumer products fairly evenly coming in, going out, and moving within the two counties. And then the third one is petroleum products. We actually have, you know that we have the pipelines coming in with refined fuels, and then we have ethanol coming in mainly on rail, and it gets mixed here with the fuel, and then trucks take it to retail in about a 2-hour radius, there's actually a lot of petroleum fuel-related trucking going on. That was, to me, one of the surprising findings in this study. I was not aware that it was such a big part of it. And then actually the drugs seem to be higher than the petroleum products. But so drugs are essentially pharmaceuticals. And most of those are actually coming in, well, not, again, not surprising, coming in and by air. So that was one different thing in all of these. If you look at the commodities by tonnage, then we have field crops as number one. And again, no big surprise there. We know that we have a lot of agriculture going on. But surprisingly, a lot of these field crops are actually coming in from other areas. The majority of this freight movement is actually coming in. And it makes sense when you start thinking about that we have a lot of processing facilities in the 2 counties. So we're bringing in product from other areas to be processed here. Gravel and sand, we have, this is mostly within the 2 counties. So moving aggregate product there to construction sites and whatnot. And then fairly evenly, the warehouse and distribution centers, again, and then livestock and related products. Most of that kind of fairly evenly distributed, incoming, outgoing, and within. So now that we had identified what we have going on, what kinds of products are coming in, what's going out, then the study looked at the truck volumes. So this study evaluates the routes in Ada and Canyon counties that are already used by trucks on a daily basis. So this is what we currently have. It doesn't necessarily say that these are the routes that we should have, or that these should be the truck routes, but this is what we already have. So keep that in mind. And so what this is looking at here is truck volumes. And again, this is using the GIS data, so those pings that I mentioned. And essentially that kind of data, it's a large-scale sample of nation's trucks, because it's a nationwide data collection. And it's used to estimate relative truck volumes really throughout the country and into Canada. So using that, and then also kind of verifying that information with classification counts. So Compass funded 24-hour classification counts in Ada and Canyon counties in about 130 sites in 2016 and 2017. So total about 130 sites, where we looked at not just how many trucks within a 24-hour period, but then classifying them by the type of trucks, so that we actually now know what kinds of trucks they are. And there are 13 different classifications, but essentially they go by the number of axles and so on. Gives us a very nice, very specific data point. So using this information, then what was done in the study is then categorizing these into 4 groups. And what you have there in the blue line there is the regional corridors. And these are the high volume truck corridors that really serve as the backbone of the network. So you have the interstate and some of the state highways. This is where you have really like orders of magnitude more trucks than anywhere else. Then you have the regional connectors, which are the yellow ones. And these are, again, fairly high volume, anywhere from 500 to 750 trucks per day, that provide connectivity from those regional freight corridors. So essentially from the interstate connecting to those primary clusters. And then the supplementary ones, you kind of keep going further down in terms of the volume. And then you have corridors that provide redundancy for those regional corridors and the regional connectors, or they connect to a secondary freight cluster. And then you have others that still have anywhere from at least 100 to 200 trucks per day. In some of the kind of relative volume, it may not be a whole lot when you have tens of thousands of vehicles, but it's still a fairly good number of trucks. Or they are, especially on the Canyon County side, most of those are agricultural routes, so there's a lot of ag-related freight that's moving on those. And we also added to this map as other routes, detour routes that have been identified for I-84. So if there's an incident on I-84 that closes lanes, there are designated detour routes how to get around it. So those are included here as other connectors. So what do we learn from this? So kind of what is the take home so far on for planning and policy considerations? And really keeping in mind that this is a freight study looking at issues from a freight perspective. The question is kind of, okay, how do we make freight a good neighbor? And one of the questions then is, are these the right truck corridors? So the map shows you where the trucks currently are. The question is that where we all want them? Is that the best place for them? Considering then, site planning, land use considerations, protecting undeveloped land near freight facilities, because now we have a map that shows where we have freight facilities currently. If that's where we want them, then we should look at preventing incompatible land uses essentially around it, through zoning changes or some kind of encroachment. Also then providing adequate buffers between incompatible land uses where we have those where freight clusters are butting to a neighborhood, those kinds of situations. And then looking at there might be some needs for non-access easements where you can prevent then the development in those buffers. And channeling development of warehouses and distribution centers to sites with freight rail access. Part of the study also looked at the rail corridor and the spurs that we have and looked at the land use along that, 400 feet of both sides of the rail with the full parcel. And what they found was that there's a lot of industrial use currently. On this rail spur here, the Boise cutoff, there were about 84 active customers using freight rail. Some of them use it more than others, but 84 currently. And also, there's a lot of potential for more industrial use of that land. There's a lot of land that's already zoned or is designated as industrial in the comprehensive plans along those rail corridors. So that's something to keep in mind. And I have some examples of then what that site planning could look like. And then in corridor planning or corridor design, again, looking at kind of what is the adjacent land uses along a roadway. How should we design intersections or interchanges? Roadway design in terms of vertical clearance, if there's an overpass or underpass, can big trucks get through? Multimodal integration, essentially saying, should the truck routes also have bike lanes or sidewalks or something for public transportation? So how could we integrate other modes and where does it make sense? And then if there are certain routes that you would want to have freight, truck routes, is there adequate signage that truckers could actually find them and make their way there? So I have a few examples of site planning on the left. in your screens, is an example of not very good site plan, because a better way of doing this could have been to put those buildings in the middle and put the parking along the edge of the site so that it would provide a bit of a buffer from that roadway. On the right, you have an example of using a golf course fairway as a buffer from that roadway to the, looks like a subdivision there. In the corridor planning, corridor design, the question really becomes, do we accommodate freight or do we design for freight? And there may be situations where you want to do one or the other. So essentially, accommodating freight means that you're designing using a smaller vehicle as your design vehicle, but that occasionally a freight, a big truck can still use those facilities. In this example, would navigate that intersection, however, would most likely get on the adjacent or opposing lane. So they would have to take a lane, which then, if this is the case, you would want to look at where you put the stop for the vehicles moving the other way, and and also looking if there's sidewalks, or, crossings or that kinds of thing. Compared to the designing for freight, you would then design those turning radii in a way that a big truck can turn using, staying in that lane. So those are the kinds of things to think about. The multimodal integration, again, so if this is an example of a situation where you might want to think about, do you really want to have a site, this is a bike lane. If you want to have a bike lane there, where you obviously have a lot of big trucks and they seem to be parking on that bike lane. So would there be another parallel corridor that would be better suited for a bike lane, or Sharrow or something like that? So again, things to think about. In a case where you want to have a bike lane, you might want to buffer that to protect it a little bit better. So again, what's in this for you? Things to consider: are these the right truck corridors? So again, the study has identified the routes, the corridors where the trucks currently are, and gives us a really good idea of how many there are and understanding why they're there. And then what modes should be on which roadways? So are there certain roads that really need to be freight corridors, truck corridors, and then should there be some others where you can have trucks and bikes or pedestrians there, or are there others then where you want to have the trucks off of that particular roadway into something else? So things to think about. And then, accommodating versus designing for freight. Again, remember, these freight corridors are based on the current freight activity centers and truck volumes. Consider the current and planned or zoned land uses and kind of what options those provide. The difference between accommodating and designing for freight, and then this issue of multimodal integration. And with that, I am happy to stand for questions.
Questions, comments for Ms. Conan?
Mr. Chair, yes.
Mr. McKinney, excuse me.
Thank you. A couple of questions. First, what was the size cutoff when considering freight trucks? What size were we dealing with? Did it only consider the larger semi-type trucks, or did it also include smaller box-type delivery trucks and so on? What was the criteria?
Mr. Chair, members, Commissioner McKinney, this included the box trucks, not. So that was the cutoff, box trucks and bigger.
Okay, so something like a FedEx truck or a UPS truck, would that have been included?
Yes, that's a truck.
Then my only other question is, when it comes to designation of truck routes, what is the mechanism for making that happen? Is it simply a matter of signage and then voluntary use of those truck routes designated by truck drivers? Or is there any more formal method or formal mechanism for getting freight to use the truck routes that we designate?
Mr. Chair, that's a very good question. When we initially started with the study, one of the deliverables was a model freight ordinance that would have looked at exactly that kind of thing. And as we, with the work group, then started to look at it, it was next to impossible to come up with an example, a template of an ordinance, because that would be one mechanism of actually designating a truck route. Actually, I'm not sure from like ITD's point of view if a city could allow or could prohibit trucks off of certain routes.
Mr. Chairman, a city cannot disallow trucks on the state highway system. We've had a city ask that, and we've had to tell them no. We designed the state highway system specifically to move freight.
Ms. Bowen, that there are a couple of state statutes that local agencies can weigh in on with respect to controlling traffic. So is there a line between controlling and prohibiting? I'm asking you practically, that you know what I do for a living.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'd have to go back and look at the code specifically in the language to see what does control entail. What was the intent? I just know that we cannot prohibit trucks on the state highway system.
Well, state highways, but Ms. Itcon, doesn't it also involve arterials?
Yes.
And so it's just not the state highways or ACHD. Well, ACHD has jurisdiction on all of them, but
Mr. Chairman, I couldn't speak for the local routes. I
Okay.
only ever consider just the state highway system. That's what ITD has jurisdiction over.
okay. And that's a good point, and I appreciate that. I appreciate you distinguishing that.
And Mr. Chair, actually from a practical point of view, a way of kind of directing trucks to particular routes would be to make those routes very easy for them to use. So with the, turning radii, few stops, anything that would make their movement efficient and reliable. That's the key thing, that if they know that on a particular roadway or on a particular route, they can reliably know how long it's going to take them, even if it takes a long time, but they know that consistently it takes a long time. They can plan for that, and that's more likely then to be used. And we really found that in Canyon County when we looked at the agricultural routes and identifying, which routes do these truckers take when they need to get from point A to point B. And oftentimes it wasn't necessarily the one that, we looking at from here would have thought. It was the one that had the fewest stop signs or had the best, no 90-degree turns, but that was the easiest for them to take, even if it was a little longer. So that might be something to consider. And then really looking at the land uses around, I think this is designing for truck routes would be a combination of looking at really land use, the road design, and then putting some ordinances in place as needed.
Anyone else? Well, Ms. Itcon, I appreciate you coming over today. It was at my suggestion
Appreciate
to at least still broaden my knowledge base and have a couple of agencies, or maybe not agencies per se, but at least get a little more information to see what the right hand and the left hand is doing. So again, thank you for coming over and presenting today.
Thank you.
And you're welcome to come back to another day.
Okay, thanks.
Item 6C. Item 6D, the 2018 City Transportation Priorities memo from Mr. Hood.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, you ready for this? Okay. So annually, the city puts together our list of priority projects for our transportation agency partners to consider. Today, what I'm going to ask you to do is go through our priority projects for ACHD, which include roadways and intersections kind of in one list, and then community programs projects in another. And I guess I would propose that we tackle them just like that, do one and then the other without intermingling them. So, you know, the goal today, maybe if I could just cut to the punchline kind of first, you know, if we can, to formalize your recommendation to the city council, and that gives me a couple of months to carry that recommendation forward and them to hopefully endorse that and then send it on to ACHD by March 16th is the last deadline. I've got some handouts here, and I know I gave you a couple of them last month as well. One request, not that we can't monkey around a little bit with some of the lower ranking projects, particularly if you want to move them into the top 20 or top 25. But just as a reminder, it's really only the top 10 or 15 that really make much of a difference. If you look at one of the handouts I'm going to hand you, again, ACHD really only considers our top 10 projects for bonus points. But we do want to set ourselves up for next year. We want the list to represent fairly accurately the city's priority projects. So I'm not saying let's, don't spend any time on projects 11 through 60. But again, let's really make sure we got the top 10, 15, even 20 accurately reflecting our priorities for this year. I did send a memo to you all on December 28th with an email asking that you send me back any of my draft priorities, if you will. It was largely the same from last year, but I did make a few changes. I did get a couple of commissioners responding before the deadline, and then I got one more commissioner responding just yesterday, and I'll share a little bit of those comments here in a second. Again, the goal is to finalize today, but if we need to, we have February as well. Again, we have till mid-March to get this over to ACHD, and I do need at least a few weeks to go through council, but ideally several weeks, because they may want to continue something out to have another discussion. But if we can finalize one or both of those lists today, that's great. So I'm going to hand out some documents here. There's really 5 different things, and I just want to tell you what they are before I actually give them to you. The first thing you're going to see is a level of service map. And again, I handed out, and you should all be familiar with this. So this is the level of service map. The other handout you'll have, it's of the 11 by 17 variety, is the ACHD prioritization process. So this is, again, and there's a question last month, but this is a county-wide prioritization list. So this isn't just Meridian projects, and it's not all of Meridian's projects. This is the top 58 projects in the county. So we'll look at that, and again, just to support points is the one you want to look at, the column. That's what we're dealing with today, is the support points column. So the higher a project ranks with us, the more bonus or support points you're going to get at ACHD in their scoring and ranking, cost-benefit analysis. So I'm going to hand those out. You'll also get a packet. And the first sheet of your prioritization packet is actually a map. And this map represents just visually the rankings on the spreadsheet that's attached that you all should be familiar with because it was in your packet in the email that I sent in the email packet from last week. But again, this map just visually shows you project 7. Where's that at? Oh, it's right here. You can find it. So intersections and roadways are on this. Just a point of clarification. This map represents the far left-hand column. Not my priority projects, but the I'll just call them out. it was Commissioner Lewis that submitted changes to mine. So these represent Stephen's changes at this point. So that's what the map is. And then both lists are attached to that map. And at the back, what you'll see, and Miranda and I are meeting sometime later this month to talk a little bit about the school district's priorities, if those are going to change year over. But at the very back are the West Ada School District's priorities. So when we get to community programs projects, if you want to look at what the school district deems priorities, you have those as well. So we won't need those to start, but that's what you're going to get. So I will start to pass those things around real quickly. And then while those are going out, I do want to summarize the comments that I have to date, but if you give me just a second, I'll start those out. Two actually in that one, so if you take
Two sheets in that one. Take two.
Two.
Okay, so Mr. Chair, those are making their way down the line. So just to clarify a little bit of Mr. Lewis's comments, he did only prioritize the top 20, which I appreciate. So you'll see far left-hand column as we get into this a little bit is blank, and sometimes so you'd go to the second column and we can just look at that one primarily. School district. So again, you can see the top 20 here, and then it cuts off, so we'll just go 21 and so on down and so forth. So I'll take some notes. I don't really have this the system down pat, Mr. Chair. So I don't know how you want to run this portion of the meeting. I'm fine with just doing changes as we go and then a motion at the end, or if you want to make motions kind of midstream and say, does everyone agree, or vote on moving 7 to 8 or 8 to 7, or however you want to do that. I know in years past my notes get a little, can get a little squirrely, but again, I'll kind of leave that up to your discretion or how you want to direct the commission to work this. I am prepared to take notes, but again, sometimes if you move 8 to 7 and then something goes from 12 to 7, was that the previous 7, or is that the new 7 and 7 goes to 8? Or anyways, it can get a little messy. But so back to Stephen's comments, he prioritized the top 20. He did have one question and a segment that stood out to him, I think, based on, he says, on the level of service map, and that's 10 mile from I-84 to Franklin. His question really was, it's at a level of service F, and there's no project to improve it. This area is actually in the 10-mile specific area plan of the city. So there's a network that really hasn't been developed yet. It is developing both on the east and west sides of the road. I agree with your summary there that it's going to probably get worse and fast. But there is a network that will feed and basically collector roadways that over time, hopefully that new signal that we talked about even last month a little bit, will eventually feed up to Franklin, and some of those folks can relieve traffic up to Franklin, or you don't have to push everybody out to 10 mile. Mm-hmm. So you get kind of these backage roads, and internal network systems within the two sections kind of helped out a little bit. But just to answer the question, that is, at least between Franklin and Interstate, improved, and there aren't any other plans to improve that right-of-way. That was just done with the interchange, and is not that old, but there aren't plans to widen it to 7 lanes or anything like that. So just gotta answer that. On the community programs list, he didn't make any recommended changes, but he did question rail with trail. So again, Stephen, I don't know, you're sitting right there, so I don't need to speak for you. I don't know if you had anything to add, but if not.
Well, I can speak to that if you
Well, Mr.
like,
Lewis.
Mr. Chairman.
I just wanted, that's a good way to segue then into Commissioner Lancaster's comments, because in his comments, he too believes that rail with trail, again, when we get to community programs, may not be the best use of our #1 ranking. I'm going to save comment on that until we get there. I'm focused mainly on roadways and intersections to start, but we will definitely talk about the railroad trail project. Roadways and intersection projects. His two comments on those had to do with McMillan Road between Meridian and Locust Grove, and McMillan Linder to Meridian. Those two projects I moved out because of ACHD's comments. So if you look on the spreadsheet, they were, previous ranking was 7 and 8. And I proposed them at 10 and 11. It looks like Stevens got them at 12 and 13. The main reason for that is right now in ACHD's CIP is only planned for a 3-lane improvement. It won't ever be 5 lanes. Mainly because if you're familiar with that area, there's large Idaho Power lines on one side and you got the Limp Canal on the other. Very constrained corridor there. So it's not an important corridor, but that, again, the widening of it will really only get you a center turn lane unless we might be able to fit 4 lanes in there, but there wouldn't be a center turn lane. But again, in Commissioner Lancaster's comments, capacity could be increased by carrying 2 westbound lanes through Locust Grove or widening McMillan to 5 lanes. Agreed, but that's not what ACHD plans to do, and that's not the scope of this project. So, again, I don't disagree with being a higher priority. I don't even necessarily disagree with putting it back in the top 10 if you all want to, but just to clarify, it's not currently planned to be a 5-lane facility like as most arterials are. And just a quick point of note, I did try to note that in the far right-hand side because there are a couple of others. Locust Grove between Amity and Victory is also planned at a 3-lane roadway. Meridian, Ustick to McMillan is also a 3-lane as far as, and McMillan to Chinden on Meridian is also a 3-lane facility. So there are a few of them out there that are only 3 lanes. For the most part, they're all 5-lane roadways. There are a couple of 7-lane roadways too, Overland and those. But just a quick note on in the notes section there. So back to Commissioner Lancaster's. I guess that's it for roadways and intersections at this point. So let's see, anything else? We ran through all of handouts. So I guess with that, Mr. Chair, I'll just stand at the ready to take notes on if there's any moving about of the priorities for roadways and intersections, unless there's other clarifying questions that you all need before we get going into that.
Mr. Hood, I looked at this, and whether it's your rankings or Mr. Lewis's rankings, the ranking seems to, at least to me, to answer a logical question of, maybe use a poor term, what's the squeakiest wheel right now in addressing those points, because you're looking at such a tremendous increase in population and volume and the capacity, and how do we service these areas? So I had a real simple comment, and that is whether we went with yours or Mr. Lewis's, they answer those questions of projects that need to be done now. So, Mr. Lewis, do you have any further comments about?
Well, sure. I could briefly just kind of justify the 4 projects I moved around. If you look, I moved Caleb's number 2 to my number 1, and then I moved 3 projects up to the 7, 8, and 9 position. And then my reasoning for that was threefold. First, I was looking for the biggest bang for the buck, I call it. So those projects that would widen from 3 to 5 lanes, because as Caleb mentioned, the 2 to 3 lane widenings don't buy you very much in capacity. They're great for safety, but there's not much capacity added in those instances. And then second, I was looking for the worst level of service projects, or rather, which project areas have the worst current level of service. And then third, I tried not to mess too much with projects that were already in ACHD's system that had that are in their current 5-year plan, had a design year, and were programmed. That's my reasoning for moving the 4 projects that I moved. If that answers your question.
Very well.
Mr. Chair?
Good.
If I can, just, we have some newer commissioners and just listening to Stephen just now, I wanted to just clarify to make sure everyone understands. So this first, well, the column that I'm highlighting kind of in the middle of the spreadsheet, in IFW or YWP, that's in integrated 5-year work plan. So that's, again, what Commissioner Lewis just mentioned. Does ACHD already plan, is it in their 5-year work plan? Are they planning to design, build, acquire the right-of-way for this project? So that's what IFYWP stands for. DSN stands for design year. So what year are they designing it? What year are they acquiring the right-of-way? What year are they constructing it? So sorry, just some of those things in what you just mentioned, I thought that may have helped somebody, I don't know. A lot of veterans here too, but I just wanted to clarify that's what those columns mean.
So this list looks a lot like we discussed this here in the fall again. Remember when we were doing the draft, kind of going through and setting our order. So it's pretty similar to what we had moved around quite a bit last year, end of last year. Just one comment, and I don't know if Caleb or Sean, if you guys could help us out, but if we moved them around to where we had our rankings where the design year and the right-of-way year were all kind of more like ones that are designed now or being designed this year, is there an advantage to having those as our top ranked ones rather than being like further down like number 10 or not?
It's probably best that I answer that because this is more of a political process. We're the squeaky wheel in this case, I guess. Honestly, if it's in design, further along in those 4 or 5 columns I just mentioned you are, the less and less this priority ranking matters. If they're already designing it, more than likely it's going to go through the process and get constructed. It's what are the next ones we want to be designed and therefore constructed. Once ACHD starts to invest in a project, they usually see it through. So honestly, you almost kind of want to do it the opposite of what you just said. Look for those projects that are kind of middle of the road. I mean, if you're playing a game, saying if you really want to look for that, you wouldn't totally have your previous priorities fall off the map, but if they're already buying right-of-way this year, the project is Project 11. They're not going to say, whoa, the city doesn't want this project anymore. Okay, we're going to press the pause button. No, it's already in motion. It's happening. But that's really if you're playing that game that way. I mean, really, this list should reflect our needs. That's how I look at it anyways, is what would we like to see constructed first? What ones would we like to see tackled first on this list? But you can look at it however you want. Again, back to the prioritization and the programming side of things, if I had the 11 by 17 spreadsheet, I mean, that's everything that goes in to their consideration. So not to belittle this process, because I think it is valuable, but, you know, those up to 9 or 10 points don't really make or break a project. But you wouldn't necessarily do it in succession.
I'll make some comments if that's all right.
Mr. Hall?
I like Stephen's ranking. Seems doable to me, but the only thing I have a couple comments on are and this was discussed, I think, at one time about making Locust Grove a priority corridor, which I think I missed that meeting, but number 16, which is Caleb's and Stephen's ranking, widen Locust Grove to 3 lanes with curb, gutter, sidewalk, and bike lanes. My recommendation is to make that 5, but that's my opinion, because we're making Locust Grove 5 lanes pretty much clear throughout the city, north and south, and just north of there between Victory and Overland, where that's our number 1 priority, where we have it in 5 lanes. So I would push to make that a 5-lane road going through the city. It's a natural corridor through the town. It's not Eagle Road, it's not Meridian Road. It's got an overpass. Let's make it 5 lanes, but that's my opinion. And then number 29, it's down the list. It's widen Victory Road to 3 lanes with curb, gutter, sidewalk, bike lanes. That is just a short section between Locust Grove and Meridian. Part of that's been built out with some of the development that's gone there already. I don't know if we can combine that with like number 6 or number 10 when they build that roundabout, push that clear through. I know there's a canal in there that needs some bridge work, or if you can phase that in with the section between Eagle Road and Locust Grove, which is number 6 on the list. Because if you completed number 6 and not number 29, you got one little bottleneck in there that's not built out. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that. And other than that, I like the way the list is.
Mr. Chair, can I make one additional comment based on Commissioner Hall's comments? So, excuse me, Project 16, Locust Grove, Amity to Victory. We certainly can make that comment. I guess what I wanted to comment on was, I don't know how many years I've been doing this now, a dozen or so. I put a cover letter on our list when we strip it to ACHD. So that's certainly something, and historically we pick 3 or 4 things. You know, we thank them for letting us be part of the process, but we also say, hey, we'd like you to do this. And one of those things could be to ask that Locust Grove either be a priority corridor and or be widened to 5 lanes instead of 3. So if that's in fact what you want me to carry forward to the city council, I would ask for some consensus or a motion or whatever to do that. But I'd be happy to ask the mayor and council if they'd be willing to add that in their letter to ACHD. Hey, we think Locust Grove should be 5, not 3 from A to B. So I'll just put that out there as there is potential and possibility. And again, annually we usually thank them, but we ask them for a couple of things too. So.
Paul?
I guess I'd like to.
Open for a motion.
Well, before we make a motion, I just kind of discuss it, but I'll make a motion to change that to 5 lanes. I'm not scared.
I mean, the way I look at that as well is that's where the traffic's going to be. And you've got your machines out there when it's being built. Why not just add 2 lanes while you're at it?
Well, I mean, I'm biased, obviously, since I live in South Meridian.
I was going to ask you that.
But I use Locust Grove more than I do Eagle Road or Meridian Road, just because it's easier to navigate. I think anybody that lives that direction understands that. And when you're crossing the freeway, it's much easier to go over an overpass that doesn't have on-ramps and off-ramps. So that's where I tend to gravitate to, even if I have to backtrack a little bit to get to where I'm going on the north side of town.
Other comments?
Mr. Chair, can I make just one more comment on that comment, just real quick? Sorry, I'm not trying to dominate
No.
the microphone, but it is fairly easy while you're out there to just add another lane, right? But as we were looking at on the spreadsheet, you do design right-of-way as the other thing. So ACHD hasn't been preserving the right-of-way for 5 lanes up until this point. They're only buying what they need in that section of Locust Grove to widen it to 3 lanes. So if you want them to widen it to 5, now all of a sudden they're buying an additional 12 or 13 or so feet from each property along that whole corridor. So it's not just as simple as, oh, while you're out there, go ahead and add some more lanes. I know you're oversimplifying it, but there are some real implications to this here, that they've historically been only acquiring from developers land they thought they need to widen it in accordance with the CIP. So it's a pretty serious matter. I was just gonna pull it up and see how much development kind of along that, at least in that mile, and maybe also.
I might be too late. I could be 10 years too late to request this because there's been a lot of development in that area. So.
Here's the other thing. I mean, it can happen, but you end up sacrificing your landscape buffers on a lot of these subdivisions. There's land there, but there's real implications, and now all of a sudden you bought half of the landscape berm that the subdivision likes too to widen the roadway. So it does help if we can get out in front of these before development has really occurred. So just real quick, because I've got it up on the screen, we can kind of see what that, I'm not going to get down to the right-of-way level, but I'll just show you kind of the development that's occurred. That section we were just talking about. So here's Locust Grove, Victory, Amity. The colored parcels are ones that have annexed and zoned, so you can assume that they've dedicated 35 or so feet to ACHD, 35 to 38 feet, so that it can eventually be widened to 3 lanes. You need generally about 48 feet to go to a 5-lane roadway. So, yeah, it's 2/3, 3/4 of the way. Now you do have, and this is where I was going to go with that. If you're going to go 5 lanes, doesn't make sense to even go the next mile, Amity to Lake Hazel. I mean, now maybe not, but if you want to preserve it, you have some real opportunities to preserve it. So are we being short-sighted and only saying, oh, this mile? No, maybe we want to ask them to make it 5 lanes all the way down to Lake Hazel or Columbia. I don't know, but
I would say all the way south to the city limits if you're going to do it, yeah.
again, there's real opportunity through here. This shows us annex, but no real development.
Like I said, I could be way too late. I mean, this is maybe something for the city council to, consider, but it'd make it a lot nicer to go north and south, but maybe 3 lanes is sufficient too, just because it's mostly residential. You're not having a lot of that commercial and retail impact that you do, like you do have along Eagle Road or Meridian. So I don't get paid to make those decisions. I'm a volunteer.
Mr. Chair, just to clarify, I'm not trying to discourage anybody. I just want, just to show you what ACHD, shoot, now we got to go back to all those. We got to go to all of these HOAs and buy the property. So not that it's not possible. It is just costly.
I just like to modify my proposal as to, have.
You haven't made it yet.
Well, I have. I've made a motion to change it to 5 lanes, but I'd like to make that, have the city council at least take that into consideration as a recommendation from our group. That's my motion.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second?
Mr. Lewis has seconded. Call for the vote. All in favor?
Mr. Chairman, before we vote, I'd like to go back to one item that we discussed a little earlier. Back on the change of the priority of the McMillan, similar kind of issue that we just discussed with respect to Locust Grove. New items that are now designated as 12 and 13, and the comment being that it's only intended to be widened to a 3-lane. I'm familiar with those 2 sections of McMillan Road and the constraints there with the canal and the power corridor. At the same time, McMillan Road from Eagle Road west to Locust Grove has already been widened to a 5-lane section. And what that does is that attracts a lot of traffic because, of course, east of Eagle Road, it's also a 5-lane section. So there's a fairly large amount of commuter traffic on McMillan, and then suddenly at Locust Grove changing to a 3-lane section, or actually today it's 2, but if we only ever have a 3-lane section there, what it will do is, that inconsistency in size creates a very noticeable bottleneck in way we have a level of service F right now on those sections, on McMillan Road west of Locust Grove. It makes me think that the 3-lane section that is being anticipated will never, ever solve the traffic problems in those areas. At least that's the concern. That's my thought and something to consider. The canal, I know there are a number of options, and of course it requires looking at the actual physical constraints to see if it's possible to do more than a 3-lane section. But the canal, for example, can be put underground, and there are a variety of options of that sort. And I guess my question is, perhaps to ACHD, have those options been considered? And is there any possibility in these sections to reconsider a 5-lane versus a 3-lane section?
Commissioners, to even give you more history, this decision on McMillan was made all the way back, I want to say about 2001, when there was a North Meridian study that was done. And at that time, it said McMillan was only going to be 3 lanes. And there's another layer that kind of goes on that we haven't really talked about, is what we have is called a master street map. And it's even different than what's in the CIP. It's basically what we are preserving for right-of-way for the ultimate future. And this section of McMillan, Anything west of Locust Grove, the chances of it being widened to 5 lanes, I would say, are slim and none. Just because the decision has been made right away, the developments occurred on both sides of the road, along with the canal and the power poles, as well as, ultimately you're seeing a lot of traffic on McMillan right now, but we just now widened Ustick to the south. That just got done. Ultimately, our goal is to widen Ustick all the way to 5 lanes to the county line. We have the corridor Chinden to the north, which currently is only 2/3 lanes, which ultimately is going to be 5/even 7 lanes in the far future. So if you have a 7-lane Chinden and a 5-lane Ustick all the way out to the county line, our hope is that McMillan could remain to be a 3-lane facility.
Okay. So, Mr. McKinney, were you looking to separate suggestion or not a suggestion, excuse me?
Motion.
Were you going to
Not specifically.
Halls or make a separate?
No, I think it was simply a more along the lines of a question that I wanted to ask to at least see what the thinking was on that particular arrangement.
And I think it's great that this, I mean, at least from my perspective, I get more information. I go, okay, I can see the moving parts, and so I really appreciate, even though I may have made some less than astute comments, that I've been educated.
I want to add again before we do this vote, because I'm probably going to vote no on this one, but the whole part of with Locust Grove and Victory, like I'm from South Meridian too, and I remember having this conversation, and I was all proponent for trying to get it wider, but just going back to what Sean had said about Chinden and Ustick, the same practice happens between Eagle and Meridian, correct? Also, the other arguments that were made when we were discussing this were that, right now it's a 2-lane road, most of it. The intersection is the problem. The roundabout's going to help rectify some of that at Victory and Locust Grove. And then the turn movements that would, for safety, that would maybe cause some congestion to the south in a residential area will come about with that 3-lane. So before we go ahead and say that it should be 5-lane all the way, I'd like you to consider that in consideration, I guess.
Locust Grove, or do you want to mention all this?
Well, there is a motion before the commission. It's been seconded with the comments made. Doesn't appear to be any suggestions to modify it, so I will call for the vote on Mr. Ryan's, or Mr. Hall's motion. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Oh, I'm opposed.
Okay, so we have 4-2.
Respectfully opposed.
All right.
Sorry, who was the other nay on that?
Mr. Davis and Mr. Hall, that's going to be a kind of like a soft note in the cover letter to think about this. Okay. I think that's a fair comment.
And like I said, I could be 10 years or 15 years too late. I mean, and we'll find out.
Okay. Mr. Hood, I guess to advance the question then, is there a burning desire to slice and dice your numbering or Mr. Lewis's numbering? Or which way are we going to go this afternoon? Guess I could ask that of the commissioners too. Mr. Hall seems to want to weigh in.
I'd prefer mine, of course, but.
Mr. Lancaster's not here. I got to help out.
Do you have his proxy?
I do, yeah.
Oh, that little white deal out of your pocket. Okay.
I would recommend Mr. Lewis's ranking. Like I said, as long as we're the top 15, I think is the most important, as Caleb has mentioned. But we hashed this out pretty hard, I know, last year. So I there's not a ton of changes here besides some of the stuff that's being completed, so I would recommend that we look at Mr. Lewis's. That's my 2 cents worth.
Okay? Mr. Hood, how do I ask this? How would you push back on what Mr. Lewis has said, or we got to stick with your rankings? And I'm not being offensive.
Mr. Chair, my feelings will not be hurt one bit. And I don't need a motion if everyone's, consensus. I'm okay with that. If you want to make a formal motion besides the one you just did about asking the council to consider Locust Grove 5 lanes south of town, if we're done with it, we can be done. I do like the comment, and I will also pursue it, just so you know, Project 29, Victory, Meridian to Locust Grove, and looking at asking HT if there's possibility to combine that with number 6 and or number 10 when those projects go forward. You know, there's a $3 million project, but there might be some efficiencies if they can bid those together and get that done at the same time. So, yeah, I don't need to beat it if you guys are satisfied. Not a lot's changed in the past 10, 11, 12 months. So
Okay.
If you're good with that, I can clean it up and easy.
So we have a consensus with today's commissioners to go with Mr. Lewis's rankings. If I could sign the executive order, I would, but I better ask for your consensus.
Yes,
Okay. Very good. Thank you for your work, Mr. Lewis.
you're welcome.
I like to think I got him going in the right direction, though.
Yes.
Well, there was some mentoring.
So, Mr. Chair, just a point of order. We do have some youth, Meridian Youth Advisory Council meets here in about 14 minutes, it looks like. So I don't know if you want to try to make it through community programs in the next 10 minutes or so, or if we want to jump to talk about speed limits on Franklin and Lake Hazel and Eagle, or what your pleasure is. But I just wanted to let you know today we can't extend past 5:30 as we typically are able to. We do have this room reserved because we're meeting on the second Monday. And they already had it, so.
And I'm going to embarrass myself. Items D and E can be deferred, but are we not locked into item F?
We should probably tackle today, so that's why I kind of bring it up. We're at a little bit of a crossroads, if you will, here with how much of what's on your agenda we can actually accomplish today.
All right, with the clock ticking down to 13, so fellow commissioners, shall we defer items D and E to our February meeting?
Yes.
Okay. So D and E, hearing no objection, we'll defer to next month. And we'll take up item 6F, election of the 2018 officers. So what stands is the chairman's position and the vice chairman's position, if I have that correct. Okay. Are there nominations?
I'll make the nomination that Mr. Ballard and
Mr.
Mr.
Hall?
Lewis retain their seats as
Okay.
chairman and vice chairman.
And Mr. Lancaster, in his written notes to Mr. Hood, would
He seconds your motion.
he would second it. Any other comments, nominations, or where are we going, gentlemen?
I am willing to continue.
Okay. And likewise for myself. So, Mr. Hall, you've put that in a motion. Is there a second on the motion that Mr. Lewis as vice chairman and Ballard as chairman retain their seats for the next year? Call for us if there's a second.
I'll second that.
So we have a second. Mr. Lewis and I discussed earlier if we both could vote, so we have 2 affirmative votes. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. So item 6F. Congratulations, Mr. Lewis.
Congratulations, Mr. Chairman, I think.
Our next, okay, future meeting topics.
Mr. Chair, if I can, one that doesn't show up on your agenda, but does show up in the staff communications to some degree is next month. David Cochran, who is with ACHD, will be here to kind of tell you a little bit about ACHD's pedestrian advisory mission, council,
Committee?
one of those C words, in hopes of maybe recruiting one of you to serve on that committee, commission, council at ACHD. So he'll tell you a little bit more of what they are, what they do, how often they meet, type of a thing. The city currently has one of its parks commissioners serving, but it doesn't seem to be a good fit and real applicable to the parks department. It seems like it's maybe something that might be a better fit for one of you all to serve on at ACHD. But again, so just think about that anyways, but he'll be here next month as well to kind of tell you what that is and what they do at ACHD. So I'd like to add that to the list of future.
Mr. Hood, you had, about an hour before today's meeting, Division Zero workshop. You'd sent that out in a meeting. Did you want to?
Yes, sir. It's just an opportunity. There is Vitruvian planning through the United Way is, I believe it's in Caldwell. I didn't get a chance to study it. It just came out this afternoon, but there's an opportunity if you want to go and hear about pedestrian opportunities and walkability, basically in Caldwell. I don't recall, January 26th maybe was the date?
Yes.
You all have an email, so if you'd like to, it's limited to the first 50 registrants, so please feel free to just directly RSVP to whatever the contact information is on that email flyer if you're interested.
Mr. Hood, and maybe with the council present, so Ms. Bowen and I had a very brief conversations about some laws on controlling highways, streets. I was curious if that could be a topic, although we're not a legal body, but is that information that would be fair for just some general information of the commissioners if we added that to a future meeting topic?
Sure.
Okay? So how would we develop that, Ms. Bowen?
Mr. Commissioner, I can go back to ITD's legal section and present the question and see if maybe they can give me some guidance to bring back to this committee.
Okay. And Mr. Martin, would that be, so we've got state highways, and if we're looking at the ACHD roadways, is it possible to get some input from your legal staff as to what local entities can do as far as what happens in a street?
Certainly, we can include that.
Okay, so I would ask the commissioners to put on future meeting topics to another day to have that discussion, and we'll have to organize that a little bit. Any other comments for future meeting topics? Okay. Our next meeting, February 5, first Monday in February, 3:30. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
See you next month. Okay, buddy.
5:23.
Which one are you doing? Doing the whole 30 right now.
I brought
Yeah.
that up last month as a basis for scope. If you go Tico, you go to the master street map and Global Streets Design Guide. But we haven't resolved good or bad.